I would just like to welcome everyone to our PASO breakfast and remind everyone that today is day 820 of our friend and colleague Michael Kovrig being imprisoned in China, unjustly detained in China. So we open our events by remembering him and remembering that he can't be with us. So I would just like to thank Michel for joining us. Michel is uh, uh, Vice President of Loomis Consulting. And he has been doing some work with us at the PASO office on our leadership structure, the way the full-time president works with the executive director, and the way I specifically work with Kim Coles, who is in the executive director position. And so while we started doing this, we thought that as we were talking, I realized that Michel would make a really interesting PASO breakfast speaker to talk to us about leadership, particularly in the time of COVID. So he's passionate about organizational agility. He's accompanies growing companies with a measurable human capital management system. Excuse me, and I have my non-human capital joining me in the presentation. This is Squiggy the pug, and we have Lenny the pug beside him on the carpet. He holds an international master's in business administration from the University of Ottawa and a bachelor's degree from the Asper School of Management and Commerce with honors, specializing in finance and human resources. He's got years of hands-on experience in the field, in leadership, in industry, in consulting, mostly with startups and scale-ups. Um, and he's got tons of interesting experience that I think in the advisory and volunteer sector. He's worked with a number of different startups and companies, tech companies mostly, it looks like. I know that you were with Nortel for a while before, and I think he brings a really interesting depth of experience mostly from the private sector, which is kind of a little bit different from the way we do things in government. So I think this should be a really interesting discussion. Et je pense que la présentation est en anglais, Michel, mais vous pouvez répondre aux questions en français.
Oui, la présentation est en anglais. The presentation is in English. I'd be happy. Je suis très heureux de prendre des questions en anglais ou en français.
Okay, so thanks very much. We'll go along, and I will monitor the chat and the Q&A box for Michel as we go. Generally, unless he pauses to ask the questions, we'll try to sort of save them till the end, unless there is sort of a hot pursuit type comment, in which case I will interrupt him. But without further ado, over to you, Michel. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And actually, interestingly, I was able to do some work with the public sector as well. In 2002, when I started Lumos, I had the opportunity to help do what became actually the framework for the leadership curriculum that went through the federal government. I don't remember exactly which division at the time. It's restructured so many times, but for leadership development. And actually, I was just talking to Pamela as well. I'm interacting now with the school that actually develops your generals and admirals of the future in Toronto, with some of the leadership there in looking in writing a leadership book. And why are we doing this? It's and that's why I think you see in front of you enduring leadership. And we talk about breaking the box. There's different ways of looking in the box. There's oftentimes even jobs are referred to as boxes in the federal government. Teams are sometimes in a box and don't necessarily have what they need to succeed. And when we talk about mobilizing talents, we can look at that from an individual perspective, a team perspective, an organization perspective, and then we can filter that and see what does that mean with regards to COVID in current times. And I would say there's a lot of tools out there that are unused, unexploited, that actually help us put the right people at the right place at the right time, and be able to manage it a little bit more systematically in ways that actually reduce stress, reduce strain, are actually a little bit more predictable. And yet these tools, we're not taught these tools, and they're not necessarily brought to the forward. And many of these have existed there for years, but they were just either sitting dormant or not put into practice. And so that's part of the chain here of enduring leadership, is really getting people involved at all levels, and mobilizing that leadership that I believe every single individual has very unique talents. And one of those talents is all our unique way of leading when we start looking at leadership differently from what it might be in institutions and organizations. Um, and then we get into some of the other challenges that we look at. And one of the problems that we're trying to solve, and this is a North American number, is that 67% of employees are not engaged or actively disengaged. That means that 2/3 of the people in your team, that means the person to your left and the person to your right, is probably disengaged. And that is not helping our society. It's not helping anyone, whether you're private sector or public sector. But I think it's just a sad story of this is this is the leadership dashboard collectively that we're in, and this is a 2017 number. The 2020 number of January, just prior to COVID, same numbers from Gartner. We're looking at people that were in burnout or near burnout, and it was again that same number, 67. The distribution was slightly different, but it meant that again 2/3 of our people are not energized, are tired, are inability to necessarily function at full capacity. And that's what I'm trying to influence, is this problem here. And how to fix this disconnection, or the disconnect that we have. Uh, a little bit of background as to what is happening. And one of the things that we're seeing is complexity. I know when I started my career, and maybe 10, 20 years before that, you could have gone into marketing, finance, accounting. You might have gone into operations. Those were the choices for university. In engineering, it was, you could be an engineer or not, and then it was mechanical, electrical, computing engineering came in. And you look at all other functions, and there were a few choices. Today, we have people who are in their teenage years having to make choices between hundreds of different choices within the same. So we've fragmented everything into little straws, and ultra specialized. So it's no longer being an accountant. You're going to be a forensic accountant. You're going to be a fiscalist. You're going to be, and it goes on and on and on and on. And that has created a lot of complexity. And the human being deals with complexity in certain ways. We sometimes shut down. So how do we deal with an increasing complex world? And time compression is really the next question. And what does leadership look like in that world? And I think COVID has given us a little window into some of those things that occur, and how to possibly manage with it. So this happens, this specialization and fragmentation is happening at the technology level. It's happening at the business process level, how things get done. And it's happening at the people level. Everyone is taking it in, and that's creating what I call, an effect of an acceleration, and that's measurable. It's in the last couple hundred years, we've gone from, when I was in school, people saying, "Oh, prior to that, you'll do one career in your life," to me in school, it's likely that I'll do 2 to 3 careers. Today, that people will do 5 to 7. That's one way of looking at the acceleration. Another way of looking at it is how often information doubles. And it's going from, it used to double every 1,000 years, every 100 years. And around the 1950s to 70s, it was every 20 years. And we saw that with cycles of technology. If you had a business process, you were probably viable for your generation and you could do a good career with it. Today, it's moving and accelerating, where in 2017, they were talking about 12, 13 months, and going towards 2020 to 2030, somewhere in the light of 12 hours, which means that every day when you get up, information has doubled. And yet, we often have processes in human resources and management that value the collection of knowledge. And here it's doubling faster than we can actually keep up with it. So in a sense, sometimes we maybe be looking at the wrong things. It's no longer as to how how much knowledge I can accumulate. With the internet, a lot of things are accessible, but is the right information accessible when I need it? So now we're moving from accumulation of data and information to how do I process it? How do I make good decisions more often? Is really the link around for me leadership, and it's really about that. That acceleration perspective, whether it's public or private sector, is affecting everyone. And the way I often speak about it is that, and it's a little clin d'oeil to the Avro Arrow, which was way ahead of its time, is that turbulence is the price to pay for going fast. A lot of startups know about that. They have the complexity of large organizations without oftentimes ill-resourced. There are many institutions helping those groups out. What's it called? The National Research Council, which I do some work with occasionally and help entrepreneurs transition from those environments to, and then within government as well, just trying to adapt to different changes in technology, demographics, and business process to stay ahead. It's affecting everyone. But this element of turbulence is that the faster we want to go, the more that we often need elements of specialization. And one of the examples that was given to me last year was that it was a picture of a mouse for a computer, and said there's actually no one person or in the world that actually knows how to build a mouse, yet we build mouse. And we build things because now we have the specialization of knowing how to put pieces together, but no one individual knows how to put this plane together, or your entire business process for your office together. It's no longer residing in one single expert. And that was something that was a little bit less true 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. This whole concept of artisans that basically could do things from stem to stern. So turbulence, speed, acceleration has an impact. And that's causing a lot of damage to people. And that's the stress piece. And the one element that I really want to highlight, and this is now scientifically proved, is that the numbers are around 80% or over of people are literally stressed by their environment, meaning that their ability for judgment is impaired. When you're in constant stress and it doesn't let go, you get into what we call this automatic mode, and that becomes extremely predictable. And that's why with some elements of psychometrics and other things like that, in understanding what people's automatic modes are, many people are in that automatic mode. And today, I feel that if I put a team of people into a room that are in their automatic mode, we can know what will come out just by the mix of people that we put in there. But if they're autonomous, meaning they're able to break free from that stress and take stock of what's happening, pull back, look at the overall forest, collectively, a team will make better decisions more often. And that's really one of the keys here towards managing in the future. And what I think a part of leadership is making that space for people to not be in this automatic mode and be what we call an autonomous mode. And there's ways of doing that. It's one of it is there's different factors like getting a personal practice for mindfulness or meditation or other things like that that provides some elements of space in order to be able to take a break and break free. So this is one of the keys here. What's interesting with some people who are specialists in the area of neurosciences and whatnot, they were telling me that there was almost no bodies of knowledge 10 years ago, that there were maybe hundreds of studies. And they were saying now, Michel, there are thousands of studies, they are conclusive. And so we're dealing with something that we were not taught in schools. It's still not taught in schools. It's new science. It's coming out faster. We can actually digest it. And that's why we need, I think, to break through. And this conference is part of trying to bring that out and saying, hey, there's a lot more information out there, and it's very usable. And I'm busy on the ground floor using it instead of being in most of the times in classrooms. And that's why I choose certain things I do in consulting is I take these practices, I go right out to the entrepreneurs who often have an appetite to try things and been doing it for years, and I see it works. I don't understand all the science behind it, but I know it works, and it works on the ground floor. And that to me means that there's something there. And then I try to collaborate with the people who have the science and the knowledge and try to understand it a little bit better so that we can communicate it clearly. Big key here on stress. And Gallup here, this is the numbers that were around the burnout, was 23 plus 44% reported feeling burnout some of the times. That's again 2/3 of the people. That's you and me. And I know I felt that way, overwhelmed at different times. And it's not linear. This thing comes and goes, so it can be very cyclical. COVID actually has affected people in this case much more severely than others. I know we have one of our employees who's an extrovert. That type of personality suffers more in COVID, or can be prone to suffering more because of that lack of contact. So the needs of extroverts might be different. It's only one dimension, one very small one, but that's 50% of the population are extroverts if we look at it demographically. So that means at least half of the people are suffering maybe a little bit more for that dimension than others. In my case, as a human resources professional, it's actually provided me more time because I was spending 2 to 4 hours in a car going from client to client who want face-to-face meetings. So this time now is actually, for me, completely changed. And I know for many of you who don't have to travel or as much, some people like to travel. They liked the opportunity to mix and connect. And for others, that travel was taking time away. For others, it was actually giving them energy and creating connection. So it's always a double-edged sword. We have to look at it in different lights. Just a quick innovation perspective, because this always comes back whether it's private or public sector, because one of the things that sometimes we don't see is, I usually try to get a show of hands. It's going to be difficult here to do that, but 2 questions. What kind of teams, heterogeneous or homogeneous, produce more innovation? And the second question is, what kind of team, heterogeneous or homogeneous, produce more satisfaction? Interesting conclusion on this one, because this came from a father and son team that's been in business for 40 years, studying and managing innovation and surveys. And what they found was that heterogeneous teams are more innovative. However, as human beings, we have more satisfaction when we're in our comfort zone, which is homogeneous teams. So this is a whole other dimension of leadership that starts talking about diversity inclusion counts. It's not necessarily straightforward. It's not necessarily in inclination. Therefore, it's something that has to be managed. It's complicated, it's complex, because it's not our natural attraction. We get attracted to homogeneous teams, the things that we know. That does not necessarily line up with innovation. Therefore, innovation is something that can be managed, but that it has to be managed if we want it in our teams and organization, because it's not necessarily a natural outcome. If people left alone, and this is why we take a look at in the public sector or private sector, our interview practices, our hiring practices, our promotion practices, there are implications here around at least one dimension around innovation, because the natural conclusion, and I've seen this with fast-growing companies, founders that will tend to hire people like themselves. That leaves absences of DNA in their teams and gaps. In French, I appelle ça les trous dans la raquette, the holes in our rackets. And I use the analogy of a tennis racket, where if we're not managing innovation and diversity, we leave holes in our racket, and we leave ourselves more susceptible in our teams, in our society, by not managing it as effectively as it can. So this is a whole other dimension that can be looked at. And then also in COVID, how do we do this? How do we manage innovation in COVID? And there's a few elements that'll come out in the rest of the presentation here to give you some insights around how do we actually do that. And I love this quote from Harvard Business Review, which is, leadership as a builder of community is the way I describe it, is really truly breakaway thinking gets its spark from playful experimentation of many people exchanging their views, integrating their experiences, and imagining different futures. And I often look at, because I know several people who work in the elements of the Foreign Service, and I find that a lot of the personalities that work there are people who like to experiment those cultures. and realizing that the demographics of your staff may not reflect the demographics of staff in other departments or areas, simply by that little bias of maybe liking that breakaway thinking or liking that experimentation with people and cultures, that your division offers opportunity, but in others where it's maybe not as evident. So again, your own paradigms, your own way of thinking, your own way of seeing things may actually not reflect the average or the common, or what exists in other departments and areas of the government. You are distinctively different as a population for at least one dimension or these dimensions. Is there any questions at this stage? Anything in the chat, Pamela?
No, I am not seeing anything. Folks know, I think at the bottom of your screen, you can raise your hand too if you want, and we will then be able to see you. There's the chat in the middle, and there's also a Q&A function.
Yeah. I
But
just want to throw it out there. If there's anyone, what's resounded with you in the first part of this presentation? Are there elements, questions that come back with challenges that you're facing or opportunities you're looking for, or just ways of wanting me to debrief the rest of the presentation? Are there any questions or opinions, comments at this stage?
so I'm not seeing any, but maybe while people have a chance to think, if they
Yeah,
want to raise their hand, maybe could I take advantage of being the chair and
for
ask a
sure.
So I was listening to your point about managing stress, and I'm wondering, I mean, for my sins, in addition to being president of PAFSO and still a foreign service officer on leave, I'm also co-champion for psychological well-being for global affairs.
Hmm.
And one of the dilemmas that we have, my co-champion and I, is a lot of what we're seeing as things that are affecting people's psychological well-being are organizational. They're management issues. I mean, they're things to do with workload, and so on and so forth. But as a middle manager, I mean, I was, deputy director level in global affairs. You don't really have yourself that much control. What you're still getting things from on high, and you have to then, work with the team to find a way to make it real. It's one of the reasons I always advise people, never work with, if you can avoid it, don't work with a senior manager who skipped the deputy director level, because they're the ones who have to take the big ideas and say, okay, and I have 6 bodies and 30 hours a week or whatever per person if we're really lucky, and how many hours is this going to take, and how do I make it into something that makes sense. But what do you think we could do? I mean, advice for senior management as well, because sometimes they listen to me on things like that, but also like at that team level, what could we do, to help people manage stress from a more structural kind of way? Because resilience is great, and I absolutely believe that resilience is key. But right now, at least at Global Affairs, I think at IRCC probably as well, the focus is really on, okay, you're an employee, you have to take care of yourself, meditate and make sure you sleep and so on and so forth. But then people are piled with all this work that they don't really feel they can get away from. So what
Yeah.
could we do?
That's such a layered question because it's the core of the issue, and part of it is that if you're in automatic mode, it starts there. You're just in dysfunction. It's literally the concept of you're trying to run a marathon, but you're sprinting the first kilometer. You're not going to make it, and that's part of the reality of our system. Is we actually created in many of our management systems um, uh, a construct for failure. And that's the first thing we have to admit. It's we push people and we break them and then we replace them. And that's the first part of the box we have to fit, is we have to acknowledge it. Carl, which one of the psychologists that works a lot with leadership teams, says that over 80% of them cannot get out of that stress mode themselves. And that he, years ago, he can't even get them into a 1-year planning because they're in the quarterly deliverables. And so one of the techniques that he's worked, and it's not really a technique, is he gets them through the quarterly planning in order to start making space. So a lot of it is awareness, and it's collective awareness. And again, it's we'll see later on how some elements of 1 + 1 can equal more than 2. when we start dealing with, talents and mindsets. We are better collectively. But if we're in that automatic mode, you're done. You're literally stalled.
Yeah.
And you're just going to be the little mouse running faster until you get tired. And eventually the gear is going to break or the mouse is going to break. And that's what we've done is we've created mazes of 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 crunch, and I call that, your handcuffs. So we've got to find those keys to the handcuffs, and part of it is, and it comes back down to we're breaking people at two out of three. That's the reality, and that's why, part of the solution is that going faster, and compressing. There's this there was one example in the business school that they talked about the big rocks in a vase.
Mm.
And there's many ways to debrief it, but one of the wrong ways to debrief it is that we say if you don't put the big rocks in first, because if you put rocks, smaller rocks and sand, if you put the sand in first, the big rocks won't fit. And really what you're trying to say is you need to put the right priorities at the right place. Well, one of the big rocks is sustainability,
Yeah.
period. And that means a lot of things from our planetary perspective, but it's human health. So when I look at leadership, there are 4 dimensions that I'm working with professionals, and one of them is wellness intelligence. You need to be fit. If you want to be an athlete going on the track, you need to be fit.
Right.
So wellness intelligence, it's not just wellness in terms of the body or the spirit or the mind, but it's wellness of our team dynamic. It's wellness, financial wellness. And it comes back to the basics of Maslow's hierarchy is you cannot get to the next level if you haven't addressed the first one. So if people are in panic or are under stress, they're not going anywhere else till you'll deal with that. And that's why a team dynamic is actually individual dynamics before you look at the team. And then the team to the organization is how your team's performing. Well, look at the composition. And that's why the baseline, the foundation, the cement is each individual in their practice. And that's why as a society, we have 2/3 of our society are just literally running like zombies, trying to get from paycheck to paycheck. And that's breaking people. So that's where we have to start. So it starts with wellness intelligence, which is a wellness environment with on a lot of factors that are environmental, financial, all the basics. And then you move into the elements of diversity. The one that I use a lot is talents. And then you get into mindfulness, which is in itself not a recipe. It's just an environmental factor that permits you to start pulling back a little bit. And if we're under that stress, just as simple as breathing in 4 seconds and out 6 might permit you to go take stock for a moment and actually make a better decision
Interesting.
for that moment. It's not as simple as that, but it's as and it is as simple as that. Is we need to be practicing it all the time. And I use the word strive. It's not a light switch. I strive to be a better me. I strive to influence people, and my kids. My daughter is studying to become a paramedic, and it's seeing interesting to see how she engages with this thing, because she actually, one of the first things when she went into the hospital, wanted to be doing the triage for the people coming in, and other people will look at that and go, that's not for me, I'm stressed, like I'd pass out in the view of needles. I'd be the worst candidate to put there. But now we're starting to look at other factors around what actually creates energy for her, removes energy for me. And this is where we have to start looking at, I use the word energy, but it's what energizes us. And that's going to be one of the elements here, because that is actually measurable. And I'll fast forward a little bit to one of the screens, but one of the biggest questions there, or answers, is that a lot of these pieces, in order to have a high performing team, you need 20 pieces in place, but they're not, it's like pieces of a clock. When you properly assemble it, it'll give one thing more than the system. It'll give time. And that's why a team properly assembled will actually create performance. But I call it natural performance, because you've got the right people. And if I have a dysfunction in one of the areas and you put somebody who has the talent in the area, they actually cancel my dysfunction. It's mathematical actually, but it actually, in the real world, it's you put 2 people together and one has a hate for something, like we call them irritants, and one has a talent for it. Well, the one that has a talent will automatically glow in that moment to take care of that piece. And this is where we get into the other whole discussion of complex systems. Complex systems cannot be managed hierarchically. Hierarchy is a control system. And as we start understanding that, a lot of government departments and processes, industrial processes and startups are very complex. And the ones that seem to succeed more is when you put the right talents together and then let them do the job. And this is something that's been discovered and continues to be discovered in military areas and whatnot, that it's no longer about command and control. There's elements of that, but it's creating the environment so that the people on the ground floor who have a little bit of information around what's happening right now can make more informed decisions. And
Yeah.
again, it comes back to making slightly better decisions more often is really, really, really the way, if I were to summarize it, is we need to help individuals, teams, and organizations make little decisions a little bit better all the time.
Interesting. So I don't want to distract you too much from your presentation, but maybe let me know if at some point this comes up. I wonder if there are ways that we, as officer level or middle management type people, which is the role most of us are in most of the time, is there a way that we can facilitate better behavior in our leaders? I mean, kind of, lead
Oof.
from the bottom. Because what I find a lot, I mean, I've worked a lot with the military myself in
Yeah.
a number of different assignments. And one thing I really liked was that you always got, the commander's intent statement, right? The commander would always tell you, okay, this is what success looks like to me. And you would then have the confidence to go off and interact with each other as different parts of the system. And people would not say, like, you come to them, I would come to them as a political advisor, go to the intelligence section or whatever and say, I need this. Well, they wouldn't tell me to go away as long as they understood how I was fulfilling the commander's intent. So it made things a lot easier. But I find that often in government, our leaders don't have the confidence to give us that intent. They're not willing to commit. I mean, people on the PAFSO executive roll their eyes at me because I'm always saying this mantra, which is we have priorities, and priorities are things we do at the expense of other things. Like, people love the idea of priorities, as like, okay, these are my important things. They don't like so much the idea that this means that if you have an opportunity, if you're advancing a priority, it might mean that you let something else go.
Yeah, well, my mind is exploding with different ways to answer your question. At least two things I want to say on this one. The first thing we do with any organization is align their reason for being with their goals, because everything else flows from that. And it's interesting how a lot of people do not know why they exist. Starting right there, people know what they do, fewer know how, and fewer know why they do it. So that's the first element of creating a hook with leadership team. The second one is walking the talk. That's just a killer. Personally, though, as I often say, I actually learned more from my bad managers than I did from the good. And it took me years to understand that because I started out my career on a leadership trainee program and was very fortunate to have some great bosses. It was only around year 5 or 6 that I had realized I'd lived in a bubble. Because at some point I wasn't actually aware of the fact, and you take it for granted. So sometimes you have to look at that I don't label good and bad anymore. There's people that are more awake than others, period.
Yeah.
And then the secondly is you started using a certain language. Team norms are very important in precision in words is very, very important. And when we have certain issues and we can put a label on it, half the problem solved. And then is it part of our goal or not? Is it attached to our reason for being? And then in some cases, there's people in leadership today that bluntly just should not be there for different reasons. And it's not a judgment. I had many friends who said, how do I get promoted? And the first question I ask is, why do you want to be promoted?
Yeah.
What passion? Well, because I want a bigger paycheck. Okay, and so and I've had them meet with people who are in these positions of responsibility and said, well, you're just setting yourself up for taking pressure pills for the rest of your life and taking one of those DD jobs. And if you look at the numbers, there's a lot of people taking on those jobs and getting themselves sick.
Yeah.
And those are realities that we don't talk about. It's the dark side of promotions in some cases, and sometimes you're not going to change the system. So again, it's why you're doing it. Some people are doing it out of passion. Some people are doing it out of ego. Some people are doing it out of money. Some people are doing it out of driven to challenges. Some people are driven to create change. Whatever it is, there's no judgment, but it's starting to understand some of those connections. And
Yeah.
I always say back, leaders are people who get up in the morning, put their pants on, take a shower like everyone else. And it's reconnecting with their soul, each person in, why are you doing what you're doing? And in those cases, it starts putting things into perspective. And then there's people who are going to be closed on this. It's the way they've done it all their life. And you're just not going to break through. In those cases, apply somewhere else and go into an environment that makes you flourish. Is part of unfortunately, the answer too, because you can't change all the system everywhere.
Yeah.
And I always said, I'll make sure that I'll change my little corner of it and try to make it a better place. But I'm not going to try to arm wrestle everything down. And these are things because I've tried,
Yeah.
and I've often got myself sick. So I've shifted my own practice from trying to convince people to want to evolve to actually finding those 20%, because it's usually 80-20 is often a good rule. Those 20% that actually want to make change and giving them the tools to go faster.
Yeah.
Because there's two ways of doing it. It's you can fight against the 80%, but it's usually 20, 60, 80 is a very average rule of people wanting or engaging or looking to engage. 60% are waiting for the mass to happen because just our human beings are risk averse, so we want to see somebody else. And there's a little YouTube video around of one of these outdoor people gathering and stuff like that, and one person starts dancing and he's alone for about 2 minutes. And they're saying the real leader is not the first person doing the crazy thing. It's the second person who actually endorses the first person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's one that we use in our leadership course to debrief to say, well, because that's the person who took the biggest risk. And then everyone follows.
Uh-huh.
And it's one that we use in understanding, crowds, virality, our own organizations. The hardest thing for a leader to do is get that critical mass. And oftentimes we do the use of consultants to be that first person to be disturbing because they're dispensable. And
Right.
I've openly had that strategy set out on tables because people will not put their careers on the line to make a change or bring a change most often. Why? Because they're not suicidal. They're smart. and
Yeah.
and should they or should they? So we use a lot of consultants sometimes to break the ice, to say the things that are uncomfortable, to talk about the elephant in the room. So a lot of it comes down to the team norm and the openness to actually speak about the elephant in the room. And then it comes down to what is our reason? And it's one of the things we talked about Paso. One of the first questions I asked you is, what's Paso's raison d'être? And is it evolving or changing? And then is the team aligned and aware of that? And then are the goals aligned? And once you have that, then it's around people, process, technology in aligning it. But if it's broken there, it's not going to be fixed. So to me, the last conference I did on it was on leadership in terms of bringing in leadership development courses in in organizations, and the simple answer was, if your leadership is not on board, you're wasting your time. So it starts at the top. If the leader's not on board, you're wasting your time. And if the person is not influenceable and stuck, find yourself another job because you're not going anywhere. They are in the position of power in a hierarchy system.
Interesting. So just you've kind of gone I think quite a bit around this, but a question has come in that's sort of related, and it says GAC is full of people who are smart, creative, and innovative. I've observed that enthusiasm snubbed out over and over by the hierarchies and fire hydrant syndrome. That's one of my personal favorites, where you write something or
Yeah.
do something and each level has to pee on it, to make their mark. They have to change something, where each level has to leave their mark, leaving an original idea unrecognizable. Might you have any ideas on how we could help managers understand this and keep that enthusiasm alive? I mean, I think you've
There are several, but the first one is you have to understand, just the ecosystem. And I'm not an expert in that of GAC, but my partner works there. So I have some insights. I have some friends that work there. So, and I hear things. And sometimes I just scratch my head. Um, and the first thing that came out was my understanding that people are often just looking for the next assignment, so stationed into a box for a year. And if we come back to engagement, how's that engaging? And so what I was told is a lot of the employees there are often not looked after as much because they have temporary bosses who, in their words, don't give a shit,
Yeah.
don't care. So we're back to an ecosystem that's more, and not to judge it, but maybe more of an ecosystem. It's a pass-through journey to get to somewhere else, and therefore it's like the little town that just has the gas station. Nobody ever stops more for just picking up gas and a sandwich. I'm on my way. You can invest a lot of time in building. So structurally, with that knowledge, is saying, well, then how do you actually build this more sustainable system? Which means that maybe the employees there need a home manager. And that's the way we dealt with it in the private sector, was we looked at the system of consultants going into different companies and how you create that sense of stability for them and give them someone who's going to be seeing them longer term. Structurally as well, we have this issue with governments every 4 years when they're in power, and when they're minorities, it's even less. And again, we have this short-term thinking. That's part of our system. So we have to recognize the system we work in, and then sometimes we can't see it making it perfect, but we can optimize. And this is where there's little things that we might be able to do in certain areas to start looking at what are we trying to do in that system. I'm actually given a wonderful opportunity in the federal public system to influence. It's a white paper that I'm writing for the leadership group, who's looking for some insights, outside views on exactly that question. How can we change or do leadership differently, Michel? So I'm going to be taking that opportunity to, and it'll happen in the next 3 months. It's happening now, to provide a first opportunity to comment. And these are some of the parallels I'm making. Is you have to understand your system and what drives the system today, and then you break it down from there. But it comes back to understanding its reason for being, understanding how we put the mechanisms together, and then look at it and say, well, if you want something different, you're going to have to change something. Otherwise, you get into, I think Einstein is the one who said it, doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Right.
And at some point, it comes back to the leaders. If the leaders are not prepared to change it, it's not going to change. You are basically then screaming in the wind and being alone. So I have a feeling, though, what I'm seeing, though, is there's different, because of compression of time, having a career of 30 years that's going to be stable no longer exists for anyone.
Yeah.
So will the system reward people who are trying to change these things? It's going to have to be built into the reward system somehow. And the last piece I look at, which is my observation around how jobs are filled, many jobs, not all, because I can't comment for all, but many, is that, and it comes back to engaging, is we do interviews on people for a job and we usually pick the person who's done this thing the most and ask them to do it again. And do most people like repetition? And so what are we doing? We're taking people, and we often say this person can do it because as managers, we don't want to train. We're too busy to train. We're too busy to manage. We're too busy to coach. We're too busy. So if we come back down, one of the insights I'll be bringing is let's bring management back. It's not HR. Management doesn't belong to HR. Management belongs to the manager, and managing is part of developing, training, aligning to goals. It's not just production. We've put a lot of managers in titles of managers, but they're doing production. They're not managing. And so for me, one of the insights is let's bring back our managers. People who actually love to develop people and communicate and connect and coordinate and manage, who love to coach. These are all parts of the racket I talked to you about. These are talents that are given by the people who create connection in the middle. And there was a great, I think it was Suits on Netflix. If people watch Netflix a little bit, I know I do sometimes. And binge watch occasionally. And on this one, it was in Suits. It's a bunch of lawyers, and they had this pool of lawyers, of which there were about 12 of them, and they had one in the middle that was like, from a billable perspective, wasn't billing anything. And so the new partner comes in, wants to make his mark, just like an executive, right? It's like, well, this person's not billing, so I'm going to throw him out. And the other guy goes, you can't get rid of this person. He goes, why? Well, because you get rid of him, nobody else is productive. So
Yeah.
this person didn't deliver anything, but he was the key connector. And I see this all the time in teams. There's people who actually, and the model I use, the systemic model that we use, actually shows that. There's the team on the field that is there to deliver, and then there's all the other people who create the environment for people to perform.
Interesting.
And and
Oh,
and and that's where I think we have to start going, is we have to bring the management back and give them the tools they need to do what they should be doing, which is managing the people for their engagement and their productivity. And I'm not talking about micromanaging. I'm talking about engaging and energizing.
that's one of the problems that we have, I think, in government, is that we've got often managers who think that it's just about telling people what to do, right? Or then you've got the ones that say, well, I'm not a manager, I'm a leader. And so I'm going to go off and like, you have to figure out how to follow me. And that doesn't work either. But I'm wondering, I don't want to divert you from your presentation because I think you've got more slides, but maybe as you go along, I'm wondering if you've given thought to how gender affects all of this. Because one thing that we've noticed is that, you know, often in teams, I mean, I think there are probably, I can see from the participants, there are other people who've had this experience. You know, I've been in a division, say, where there's me and say two other deputies. And as a woman, I often end up with a sort of managing deputy role, which ends up being like a lot of emotional labor as well, right?
Yeah.
Being the one who checks in on people, how's everything going, what's going on in your life, kind of what's your productivity level this week, all of those kinds of things. And sometimes that is really devalued in teams. But if it doesn't happen, it like way less work gets done. So sometimes I would think of it as, I'm stuck with all the housekeeping, or, to be totally politically incorrect, the wife tasks in this organization. And, in one division, I remember bringing this at my appraisal time and, describing to my boss all of the things I had done. And he said, oh, that's not really work. That's not part of the job. That doesn't belong in your appraisal. So I said, all right, we did my thing. It was fine. I still had lots of other stuff. And then I stopped doing it. I stopped doing it for 6 weeks. And on week 6, he was coming to me and saying, okay, so you've made your point. It's but how do we I'm curious if you've given any thought to how gender affects some of these things, and how
Well,
how
I've seen it firsthand. The first thing I would say in your first comment is I just removed the word in government. It's everywhere like that, in
yeah.
private sector as well, and whatnot. So you get these elements of, we're back to, oftentimes we'll use the words lean HR, lean manufacturing, lean whatever, and it's doing more with less, but they're cutting the wrong corners. So it comes back to, again, what is the job description of a manager? In most cases, it's not managing. So why are they called managers? They're probably project people delivering stuff. And that's why in the talent stuff, and I'll try to get to that today, is they separate in the talents. The coaching piece is really one of the people managing engagement piece. And that's why you got to put people who love to do that in those roles. And this is why it's not hierarchical. Why is a manager paid more than other people? It's an essential piece of the clock to give time. And that's why this system of talents means that all the systems are necessary and have equal weight. Yet our hierarchies traditionally, and this I've seen a lot in all organizations, is we want to promote people, and it was always around budgets at the time. It's 1960s, it was how big your budget was. And if you had people and equipment, you had more budget, therefore you were more senior. In the 80s, it started shifting towards people, especially in the R&D, where I spent a lot of years in Bell Northern Research. And so you had these managers, but they were essentially delivering projects and killing their staff. literally leaving body counts behind them, but they were seen as heroes. And it was, again, what do we value within that system? So until the system starts recognizing that elephant in the room and calling it what it is, but and then is it gender? This is where I think the whole discussion around I don't use the word diversity anymore because Noah's Ark was diverse, but it wasn't inclusive. And so diversity is not necessarily the one element itself, but it's that inclusivity. It's versus the roles. Is you need people supporting the organization, training and developing people. And so if you have a culture that's always under stress, you are only going to hire the person that can already do the job, and you don't care if that motivates them or not. They've got the CV, they've done it, they know how to do it. I don't have to train them. Go. And that's how we hire in many in most organizations. Instead of saying, okay, am I hiring for the government to develop this person throughout a 20, 30 year, 40-year journey? No, I don't believe we do. I don't believe we do that in corporations either. And I've intervened as an HR person because I've often had an HR hat and an ops hat at the same time, where they were leaving talented people that would have been key resources leaving. And in a few cases, I intercepted these people, hired them, gave them my best employees in exchange because I was looking at the organization. And 3 months later, this person in the organization was like, where'd you find them? Well, you were leaving them go. Walk out the door. Because you were looking at the CV and saying, he can't do the job I've got right now. But this person was agile, could learn. And in the industry, or in the context I talked about, change is accelerating. Is acquired knowledge more important now, or the ability to learn? I see CVs all the time where people put over 20 years of experience. And the first question that comes to my mind is, when's the last time you had an original thought and learned something new? Because otherwise you're irrelevant to me. And that's hard to take, because it's we value ourselves on, well, I've got 20 years. Yeah, but you got 20 years of doing the same thing. And
Yeah.
the system is changing. We no longer use those tools. It's what are you doing to learn? And so until we start valuing those things in our system, it's not going to change. So again, it's what I would say is attack the system, not the people. The people are stuck in the system, and so you have to address those elements of the system. And this is where I think government is broken up into a lot of arms. That I love the word pilot project. And when pilots become contagious and people start doing it, that's when you're really affecting your system. And that's been the tactic that I've been using, is call it a pilot, do it, show it can be done, because usually people are, that can't be done. That's impossible. Watch me. But I'll do it with people who have the appetite to do it, and show that it can be done, and then document the case study, talk about it in a conference, and then taint other people. And so I think that's one of the recipes to do it. And I think at some point it stops being how many men, how many women do I have, how many black, white, yellow, green, blue people do I have. It's do I have a diverse team that's innovative and can learn? And that's where we start. I think we start becoming, it's the savoir-être, it's the know how to be that we're dealing with here. And more and more in neurosciences and whatnot, we're starting to really talk about this element of not just, it's not just what I know, it's how I do it. Do we want to work with people who are dicks and who don't? It's no. The answer is no. People don't want to. So, there's a lot of industries today that I see that there's people who are still taking advantage of people and doing things like that, because that's what they, and sometimes it's they just don't know better. And I've worked with people that was like, they would fire a person on Friday, it wasn't government, because the rest of the people would work harder on Monday. And I would start asking, it's like, well, why are you doing this? And it's really what they learned, and it worked. That's all. Nobody ever showed them anything different. So, but I've had other people who would literally be nasty and make their staff cry because they needed to feel powerful that morning, and they were feeling bad, so they had to make everyone else feel bad. Those people will lose their, hopefully lose their job, but they shouldn't be in position of power, but they are. But that's where I think you get this disengagement, where people are feeling handicapped and tied. And what I'm saying to them is, leave, go. Be a leader, get out of there. And if enough people do that, those people will be isolated and won't be able to function that way anymore. And we're starting to see that in our society with Black Lives Matter is one of the things that's happening right now, that people are saying, this is enough. We're going to call it. And so there needs to be more of that, where these people will be simply called out and or isolated because nobody wants to work with them. And today they're beat up. People feel that, well, I need the job, I need the money, I need the income. Is it worth your health?
Yeah.
And so I think we have to address the issue from both ends, from the system end. And this is where I have an opportunity to actually put a white paper in that system and see where it goes, which like I did in 2002, actually, and was able to, provides an element of insight into what became the Federal Public Service leadership trainee development for future leaders, and hopefully have an opportunity to do it again. But then on the other side is, that's why I come back to leadership being every individual. What are you going to do to not go through that? And I think in some cases we often criticize our millennials, but they saw their parents and their friends go through the grinder and not be respected, so they don't have a lot of respect for these rules and hierarchies. And I think we're seeing the backlash of it. So I don't judge them very much. I try to understand them, and I
Excellent.
do find ways to engage with them. They're very engaging people, but they just put the bullshit aside, saying no, career for life doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So they see things differently because they've had different experiences, and their experiences are as valid as ours. So yeah, I think it comes back down to system, individuals, and I think somewhere we'll meet in the middle. And they're big systems and complicated systems, so it's going to take a lot of people moving the wave. But again, it takes a wave.
Excellent. Excellent. Michel, it's 9 o'clock. So if you're willing to keep
Oh,
talking,
wow. I am. I'm going to run through this really quickly to give you guys the connection. So if you give me 5 minutes, and then I'd love to take questions if there are questions, and continue this. I love this quote from Andrew Carnegie, which is, the average person puts only 25% of his energy in the ability to his work, and the world takes off his hat to those that put 50% of their capacity. And we go, wow, to the people doing 100. And to me, it's part of leadership. Leadership is not something you're given. It's not something you take. Leadership is something you're given by others. And that's the first definition of it. Manager position you get, that's the box. Leadership to me is when others are saying you are a leader because of what they observe. And to me, to be a leader is something you strive to, because it's not something like a switch. But I think it's also too, if we can help the average person go from 25 to 50, we're doubling our productivity. We're doubling our impact. And I think that's the secret here. Let's not talk about being 100. Let's just talk about being a better selves, better teams, better organizations, little bits at a time. And these little incremental changes can make huge differences, because we're only, like I said, 67% of people. It means 1/3 are engaged. Change that number to 50%. Wow, you've completely transformed your team. So we're not dealing with elite situations here. We're dealing with chronically broken. It's really asking, what am I really passionate about and excellent at, and how can I be 100% focused on the core skills or those things that energize me? That's the angle I take when I do individual and team coachings. With the organization, it's what's their reason for being, and try to align that. And when you do the alignment of those two things, magic happens. You get high performance teams. How do we do that? I call it breaking the box. We're very strong at the know-how, the hard skills. We know a little bit about the soft skills, but then we lack in what I call the enduring skills. And that's what I try to bring at the table. It's the understanding of what energizes us. And that's really what they call the personality of doing. There's some science that came out of Europe. Lady Chantal Jans, who's now in her 70s, who had an incredible personal practice in consulting using these tools, who developed them. She had 2 PhDs, one as a French engineer and another one as a holistic Chinese healer, and put those 2 elements in place in understanding what energizes people. And I found that this works at the street level in teams and organizations. And that's what we call the personality of doing, is the things that create wealth and value, but I love to do. This is Einstein's quote, which is oftentimes, and we see this a lot of times, where we judge people on the things they can't do. And this is about putting the right people at the right place at the right time. So many times I've seen people being fantastic at something, they get promoted or they change jobs, and they all of a sudden become losers. What changed? Well, the environment changed. The person didn't change. They're not a loser. They were just like this fish here that says, where the monkey's saying, hey, you can't climb a tree, ha ha ha. So on you. And I see that happening in organizations a lot of times. It's because we don't take the time. We have boxes, and we talk about not having resources or being a pénurie de la main d'oeuvre. And I keep saying what we have a lack of is square people to put into square boxes. And people have all kinds of shapes, and every single person has talent. What is that talent? How does it fit with the other talents so that 1 + 1 = more than 2? And that's what I do. How do we do that? It's the analogy of the pieces of a clock. Those energizing talents, and I'll show you the list of what they are. They're measurable, they're manageable. They are lead indicators of engagement, which means that engagement leads to performance. And I've seen this. And this means that relative to a system as a whole, a team and a project that has a goal is a system. The moment you have an individual and a goal, or a team and a goal, or an organization goal, you have a system. And you don't necessarily need hierarchy. What you do need are different components that, when put together, equal bigger than their sum. And you get, I call it, you get the time. And that's why it means it's that. The other part of this element of complex systems and whatnot is actually we're very, very well trained in our society, in our schools, in our management schools, especially for left brain thinking. It's the quant in us. It's the quantifiers, the mathematician, the project manager. The right brain is the creative brain that doesn't express itself in words. So this talent test that we talk about actually is measuring these things that we don't express in words. But it's that side of the brain that the neuroscience is starting to realize that create engagement. And so when we're dealing with staff, we need to train our managers to be able to reach and train individuals to be able to reach into their right brain and put their entire brain at the service of solving problems. And so we tend to be a left brain society. And that's why I call this putting the left brain to the service of our right brain and using our entire brain is one of the paths. And that doesn't take more energy. It's actually finding those things that create passion in us. And if you're passionate about something, you're going to learn faster. You're going to perform at it better. And three things that it brings, and this you've seen, Pam, is an element of mindset. I won't go into the details of it, but there are at least multiple mindsets, but we measure 4. But it means that, for example, I'm a green to black, which means that if I put myself into a room with a conversation with someone who's also green to black, we're going to go into a groupthink. And so the diversity of mindsets is really important. Imagine a project team understanding their mindsets and understanding that they may not look at the broad lines, or they may not look at the need for analysis and elements. You can do a quick check-in on that and actually address it. So these blind spots are readily addressable once we know they're there. And so that's the first thing I train teams is, what is your mindset? And it's really simple to learn. How do we manage the gap of the mindset? Those are really easy things to learn. And I think should be built into meeting softwares like this, because when you meet with people, what's the collective mindset at that moment? Where are blind spots? And this again helps making better decisions faster. And we're dealing here with problem solving in terms of this mindset. And again, there's no good or bad answers. It's not what mindset that I have that's good or bad. It's we need to make sure that we have coverage of all these mindsets. Then we look at the dynamics of the profiles. And this I've done with a bunch of teams, but the one I saw that was the most, I've yet to write the case study, is with 8 teams at University of Paris in May, entrepreneurial groups, and we did their dynamic of their teams. And if you're a Q1, you're people that like to start things. Q2, you like to build on that start. Q3 people are stabilizers, people who like to mature, stabilize things, create predictability. Q4 are the return on experience, people who like to synthesize the knowledge of the team. And what do we do with it? It's to restart a new project, or the postmortems, what are our learnings of it? And you got people with different dynamics. In the middle, it's a bit like the oil and the gas in a motor. It doesn't deliver anything in such as the conversation we had around creating those connections in people, ideas, processes. We call that the regulation. So a team with Q1 will start up their project real fast and they'll stall. A Q3 will stall initially and as the project matures, we'll then get going. So what I was doing was telling, the Q1 teams to go talk to the Q3 teams and vice versa to help each other out. It was as simple as that. It's, hey, have you thought of talking team one? Go talk to team three, and see what happens. Just by their natural talents, they'll be able to help each other out. Because the team that's stalling initially with the people who are getting going fast, well, again, 1 + 1 is equal to more than 2. And I don't want to oversimplify, but it is that simple. It's like assembling Legos, but you have to understand what those talents are and behind what they do. And then the last piece is gets into more of a more complicated mapping, but there are 20 tiles. So think of it as you have 20 elements. They're fractal, so you can break them down into smaller and smaller pieces. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with a manageable number of things that any team organization needs to have. All these elements, they are not hierarchy. So it's not just the boss does strategy. And just the one element, for example, it's the challenger here that is the generator of net new ideas, and it's the strategist here who's the synthesizer. And usually the person piloting the organization needs to ensure that there's a balance of strategy and proper decisions for the system. They don't need to make all the decisions. They need to ensure, though, that their system makes the decisions. And they have to create a balance between. So actually, the function of managing is not one of taking risk. That's the team's role, to generate net risk. It's the leader's role is to actually create an equilibrium, what I call harmonization. So I think we need to teach our leaders what is harmonization about? Well, it starts with our reason for being and our goals and ensuring the system has the components it needs to deliver. And that starts getting into a language and a definition and then a management approach to say, oh, is this measurable? Yes, pieces are. Well, let's do it. And this happens to link to the things that energize the person. And this is where you have energizing talents, complementary talents, absences of talents, and irritants. And they all play different roles. Irritants are part of our talents. Somebody who has an irritant around being an expert won't look or seek to develop in-depth knowledge on something. Well, that has value because it means they'll be biased in other ways. So in a sense, we're all biased individuals in our own ways, but if we combine those biases together, they actually produce more than the sum and create interactions that are actually very productive. And again, there's no good responses here. Everyone has their talents and everybody has holes in their talents. No one's perfect. And so we're perfectly imperfect. And that's the other part of dealing with leadership is oftentimes building up individuals so that they have this confidence in what they bring at the table and where it best fits. And when it doesn't fit, try to, not try to jam it in. And what you get with that is you get learning and engagement, you get decision support, a system that actually helps you. You get predictability in your system. You get elements of running the marathon that are more sustainable, and it's measurable. So this comes back to just management. But where we're dealing here is collective intelligence and how to mobilize it. And this, again, I've yet to see it trained and taught in business schools. We're not doing that yet, and we need to do that. But to me, I start with all of the individuals. The first thing I do with leadership teams of any sort is we look at the personal journey. It starts with the individual, and then we look at the collective talents, and then we look at the gaps, which lead to sometimes dysfunctions if they're not aware. And we put the stopgap measures, and then I call that a start, stop, go. What do we need to stop doing, start doing, that we're not doing, and continue doing? And then we get on that journey of if your reason for being is clear, and it's linked into the goals. The rest is actually operational details, pretty much at that stage. Bit of a complicated chart, but it really means that's what I just said here. You start at the individual, and this is where we, attract, select, engage, deploy, develop. At the team level, we're looking at complementariness and balance, how to put the people together that will perform. And then at the organization unit, we're dealing with organizational stability, sustainability, and agility. Challenges, progression, resource pools, a lot of words that you might recognize there. But that become, again, how do we deploy people a little bit better? And that is, for me, sustainable leadership.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. Someone was asking if you are willing to share the slides. If can we get a
Absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. I'll have that sent to you right after this.
Oh, okay, that would be great. And I let them know that we're also going to post the video. I mean, if you still have a few more minutes, we can take some more questions. And
No
if
problem.
nobody, maybe I'll keep abusing the chair thing. I have a question too about. I'm wondering if you've identified the kind of, what are the words I'm looking for? Like the sort of danger elements of an organization that can really keep people in a place that's a bad fit. I mean, I'm thinking, obviously right now people are going to be are worried about the economy and finding a new job and COVID and so on and so forth. But I think one of the ways that the Foreign Service in particular kind of keeps people in situations that maybe are not good for them is status. The perceived status of being a foreign service officer, and nobody wants to quit because it's such a hard job to get. And I do see, not always, but I do see some people where, really what I want to say to them and what I have said to some people, which does not always go over very well, is, you know, there are certain kind of immutable things about this job, and maybe it's not the right place for you. So people are kind of, they get hooked into a situation by all those things.
It's funny because I've had a lot of discussions with many of my own friends around that who are in the public service, and it's the same in the private sector. We get caught up in that hierarchy, and we're looking for, one of the images I have is it's not the staircase but the ladder, and we want that next rung. And I
Yeah.
remember one individual walking into my office at Nortel and saying, Michelle, I want a promotion. How do I do that? And the first question I sat back and said, sit down, talk to me. Why do you want a promotion? And we
What do
talked,
you want to do? Yeah. Yeah.
why is it the promotion? It came down to, well, because I want a bigger paycheck. And it was literally, over an hour. And at some point, what I was trying to make them aware is what is driving you for that behavior, because getting that promotion, is that going to make you excited?
Yeah.
Um, and we lost sight for 7 years. And then when I was at Hyperchip, at some point he came in as a consultant and he was like, Michelle, you transformed my life. I go, what do you mean? And then he recalled this conversation I hadn't remembered. And a lot of it was, again, it's bringing people back to, if it doesn't energizes you, why do you really want to do it? Because you're going to get yourself sick. To
Yeah.
me, it's as simple as that. It's, do you really want to be sick? And at some point, that's really the reality check is, and again, we have, unfortunately, in our systems, remunerate position. And this is why I know with one client, they were about to promote this individual who was a strategist. And the first thing they said is, well, if we promote him to VP, we're going to have to give him staff. And I said, no, he had an allergy in coaching. He was not. I said, you need to create a position that values him for the strategist, but you need to give him people that can train his staff and support his staff. And it happened to be the director of operations, who was phenomenal in onboarding people and giving the support structures, and actually brought sales and operations closer together. So here we have the DNA of two individuals, not departments. One who should be promoted in sales because he was a strategist for that reason, but recognize that. But we don't see our societies that way. He's going to be VP, he's got a position, the next time he's going to transfer over and they're going to give him 10 staff. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're a VP. And that's why we have to start recognizing, I think, these talents, is that we literally take a hero and we make a zero of them the moment we give him staff,
Yeah.
because it's not in his natural DNA.
Yeah.
And it's oftentimes, when we look at job descriptions, I often say, well, it looks like a duck with a beak of an eagle and a platypus hand and a fin, and we create a job description for a non-human,
Yeah.
and then we put them in place. So oftentimes there's many positions that I have heard of in the in GAG that people say, well, you can handle that job for a year, maybe two. And
Yeah.
it's an in and out, and it's literally, I'm going to go, and it's like going to do a sweat.
Yeah.
I'm going to go through this pain, and I'm going to get the promotion after, because I've walked through the desert. Um,
Yeah.
and part of that may be true as well, because with the Navy SEALs and whatnot, they put them through certain kind of training that builds up certain people in certain skills. I'm okay with that. But it's a bit like there are also natural elements where some people will not have the resilience for that, or not be into it. So there's this element of is it for me? Because you look at Olympic athletes in different sports, and the body shape becomes almost predictable for that sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny, you look at swimmers is the one that's the most obvious, because they're not they're wearing just the bathing suits, but at the end, when they're at the Olympics, all superstars, they all got the same shape,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're all eating the same thing, they're all training the same thing, and some of them are going to be a little bit better than the others, but at the end of the day, they're at their lead of their sport. When they're young and 8 years old and all this like that, you've got all the shapes in there. So are there certain shapes? So we get into this whole discussion, are there DNAs of leaders? And this is why I make a distinction between management and leadership. I
Yeah.
believe everyone in their 20 talents, it's each of those talents that you have are unique and is an expression of your leadership in the way you'll do it, not hierarchical. And when you put the right people together, they will perform. And because your talents are going to be necessary at a certain time, that's when you become the natural leader of that group, doing whatever it is they're doing at that moment. So if you're a Q1 person, you'll be at your place at the startup. If you're a Q3, you'll be the stabilizer. If you're a Q2, you'll be the builder. If you're the Q4, you'll be taking in the intelligences and redesigning the processes. These are the things that are natural, and by composing it again, everyone is a natural leader. That's why I said leadership is not something you take, it's something you're given by your team, and we make place for these people. And I think that's the leadership piece that I want to promote, and it's a little harder to do within these pyramidal things, but it's not impossible, because many organizations, they are realizing that the role of the leader is to put the right people together and let them do the job. So we're back to this whole thing of, I want to influence individuals with this new knowledge to say, you don't have to be handcuffed. If you want to put yourself through pain, that's okay too. I've done it in my career. I call it my doctorates, and I do it jokingly. And I knew what I was doing, and I knew it was going to be painful, but I chose because I wanted that kind of experience. In a lot of cases, I tell people, fail fast, learn from that failure, because we often try to make ourselves invincible, and we put a carapace on us. And I see a lot of leaders trying to protect this nice shiny armor that's so artificial. And I'm trying to promote to say that armor is not necessary to be a better you. And I think that's, again, trying to attack it at both ends through individuals. And that's why I often do a lot of coaching people who lose their jobs, because they find themselves in a half cup empty. And I look at them and say, this is the best opportunity. Why? Because when it happened to me, I crashed and burned for 9 months. And in hindsight, it was the time I should have probably done something else. And I know exactly what that something else is now in hindsight, which was an opportunity of a lifetime that I missed. And I've coached other people like that, and they're taking advantage of these opportunities. So it's not just me saying it. It's
So it wasn't wasted.
literally,
Yeah.
it wasn't a waste. And so, but it was just the path of learning I had to go through. And so sometimes we have to go through this pain to learn, what makes us better. But like I said, I think it's individual, system. And if the system's broken at some point, there'll be people that have the appetite to rebuild it. But oftentimes as human beings, we wait till it's bloody broken before we fix it.
Yeah.
And eventually it's how many body counts do we have? And I call these the bloody noses. And it happens in industry as well. Somebody who's been successful, you're coming and say, you're about to hit a wall. Oh no, Michel, this is my secret sauce. Schmack. They won't call me yet. So it's like, pay me now or pay me more later. Because that's the human behavior. So part of it is we're dealing with humans. And we as humans are, working in these funky ways. And like I said, by being just a little bit less in automatic mode, creating critical mass, challenging the system at an appropriate time, given an opportunity. I'm given an opportunity to put a white paper into the system. It's often I say change is just creating a slightly different avenue. You may not see the change this year, but I know I've provoked change that, like this gentleman who 7 years later says it transformed his life. It was a 1 hour conversation.
Yeah.
And how
Yeah.
do we
No,
multiply those? And I think that's where we're going. And like I said, there's a lot of people out there looking for a change because it's unsustainable for them already. They're already getting sick, and they're saying there's got to be something different.
yeah.
And those are the people that I want to say, yeah, there is. And by the way, here's the roadmap. But it's
Well,
not a prescriptive roadmap. It's one of engage as a leader and participate in understanding what engages you, what engages others, and get together and do stuff.
yeah. No, it's really that's. I mean, I did your tests, your program, and I have to say, I really wish I had done it, a long time ago. But it's definitely super useful and really nailed me, for better or for worse. And, some qualities that
Well, you can't remain indifferent. That's
it,
the point. That's the point. Is you cannot go in front of this and be indifferent unless you have no sensitivities whatsoever. And I
yeah,
have not come across anyone where that has happened.
yeah,
I've had some clients that took 5 years
yeah,
to start the change, and I've had calls back where I remember one, he went through 7 COOs, chief operating officers, in a row. A 53-year-old man that said all of a sudden he used to manage in a tight grip and squeezed out all the leadership out of his team, and all of a sudden said, I want to retire, but I have no leadership team. Yeah, but you created your bed. And there's no way that these people, we could convert them into leaders. He literally, if he wanted to retire, had to rebuild an entire new team because
yeah,
that was the ecosystem that he built.
yeah,
And that was it. But he was also, it was the only mandate in my life that I refused to do phase two because I said, you're not ready, you're not open. Five
yeah,
years later, I get a call from one of the last CEOs. He said, Michel, I don't know what you did to him, but he's starting to put in place your recommendations. But that's because it had to be done at his time. I couldn't push this. And that's the other part of it. You got to go at the pace of the people.
there's a sort of a
And
natural.
yeah, and there's windows of opportunities, and sometimes it's not now. So I don't push change. I make it. It's like a garden. You got to prepare it, and then the things will grow in it because you're creating that environment. So you can't push people into this unless your mandate is to come in and transform and be that consultant who comes in and takes an axe, and because that's really what it comes down to doing is you're rebuilding something
You're
new.
clearing a garden.
But I don't really care for those kind of mandates. I'm very good at them, but I don't care for those
Yeah,
very much because you're trying to. It's like a doctor just trying to save the body at
yeah,
some point, and you choose your mandates, and that's why I said I've shifted my practice over the last years to work with people who um, want to get it, are getting it, are trying to figure it out and want to be part of a solution, but don't necessarily have all the tools. I don't pretend to have all the tools as well, but I've got some that work, and I want to share those. And I invite anyone who wants to get into, conscious leadership is really what it is. It's just about starting with being a better self, building better teams, building better organizations that make slightly better decisions more often. And if we do that, we transform this world.
excellent. Well, listen, that sounds like a good kind of note to end on. I'm looking at the screen. I'm not seeing. Does anybody have any final questions? Or if you want to put up your hand, I can unmute you so you can ask your question with your actual voice. If you don't want to use the chat or the Q&A. And maybe I'll ask you. So we're coming now into our assignment cycle at GAC. Where people are going to be recruiting people for their teams, to start in the summertime. People are going to be looking for, in many cases, like a new team to join. Maybe, do you have any tips for any questions or elements that people could be keeping in mind, as from both points of view, as say the officer and the manager leader, they're going through this process, what they could.
It's yeah. The first thing, and that was yesterday's course for the leadership team for the entrepreneurs, is question the job description, because it's at some point that's in a sense it's. I say before you start filling a job, again, what's your goal? What are you trying to do? It's an opportunity. It's not a box. It's an opportunity to define how you actually define your team and your organization. So oftentimes we're back at the job description, this famous thing that we write up, and then what's your mindset in filling it? Just asking those two questions can fundamentally change the DNA you might put into it. Because you should be asking is, it's not just aside from, do I want someone that can do this stuff? But what needs to change in the role? What needs to evolve? Can that person learn? So you bring the whole other discussion around DNA fundamentally into the job descriptions. And so often I see like these job descriptions that have been written 10 years ago and haven't evolved, or a list of tasks instead of responsibilities, which is even worse because you paint the tasks then into a prescription, into a world that's changing. And so you get people who, yeah, I've done all the tasks, no results. I've done all the tasks.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and and in the psychometrics, those are people that have the D to the right, will be very proud in having done the task. So define the task, they do it. That doesn't mean that you get results. And so I think we have to re-question a lot of this. We're back in the system again, but in a very operational piece of it. But the job description is the expression, or the job descriptions, all the job descriptions together is the organization. If you look at them in context of the goal of the organization and align them, and just have that view, and take once a quarter, just take a look and say, are we aligned? What needs to change? This person has left. It's an opportunity to redefine the role, potentially, without disturbing a human being and putting a different DNA that could reshape it completely. It's a beautiful opportunity. And oftentimes the last piece is when people say, well, I've got this, Michel, find me a programmer, find me a marketing person, find me a salesperson, find me an operations person. I go, what flavor? And they don't know what I mean. It's really the summary of this conversation. It's not because it's a box that it's going to be homogeneous. It's what are you trying to achieve differently? And if you want to stability and operate, find yourself a Q3 person, same talents. If you want to, don't know, you want to transform, but you don't know where, find yourself a Q4 person who's going to synthesize. And if you want, you got a new department, you'll probably need a Q1 person who has a love and joy of putting in place of the processes, which is the hate of people who like to stabilize. And this is really the examples, very summary examples of what I mean by talents. It's the natural talents for some people. A beaver loves to build dams. Period. So if you need a dam, get yourself a beaver. If you need something that flies, maybe it's an eagle, maybe it's a duck. If you have a lake, well, maybe a duck is better. A fish might work too, but an eagle won't. It's
Yeah.
and that's the whole thing. It's how do we assemble teams, but we tend to treat this with boxes and the know-how. And I'm saying it goes way beyond the know-how. The know-how should be 20%. And then it's everything else to me that really, really, really brings out the value in how we fill it. We fill a box, fill a role, and build teams.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I'll maybe give the participants, we've got Christine, Jennifer, Monique, Perry. This is your chance to ask, the last chance to ask a question or make a comment to Michel or me before we go. And I'm seeing them looking very quiet. So I will stop our recording.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was really, really great. There, I've stopped the recording.